Seches Megillah Daf Yud Beis begins with the conclusion of the Gemara's discussion about what the 70 years of the Golus between the first Beis Hamikdash and the second Beis Hamikdash, what they refer to, how it's actually meant to be counted. Then the Gemara will return to its explanation of Megillah Esther and continue working through the Megillah and the story line by line, explaining what many of the words and phrases there refer to and adding midrashim. So first of all, the Gemara says that even Daniel himself had trouble with the calculation of what the 70 years were, not only Belshazzar and Achashverosh, as we said earlier, because Daniel says, in the first year of his reign, Daniel, worked hard to understand the calculations. I understood the calculations. It means it was an earlier time when he made a mistake, and he didn't, and only at this point did he understand it. Now the Gemara wants to know what is actually the correct calculation, because there are two different psukim discussing the 70 years. One says that the 70 years of the exile will end with Melois Bavel, when 7 years are completed for Bavel, which seems to indicate once the dominion of the Babylonians over Klal Yisrael will have ended, will be at 70 years since it began. That's when the exile will end. And the other one says it will be 70 years L'Charvez Yerushalayim, from the destruction of Yerushalayim. Now Yerushalayim was destroyed 18 years after Bavel took control of the area. So how do you calculate the 18 years? It seems to be two contradictory psukim. Again, one counts from the ascendancy of the Babylonians, and one counts from the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So the Gemara says that the actual redemption also took place in two stages. One was 70 years from the ascendancy of the Babylonian Empire. The other was 18 years later, which was 7 years from the Churban. At 70 years from the creation of the Babylonian Empire, the king Koresh, Cyrus, took over Persia, and he gave permission to Klal Yisrael to go back to Yerushalayim and to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash, as it says, so says Koresh, king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth, God, Master, Lord of the heavens, has given to me, and he's commanded me to build a house for him, a Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim. Therefore he says, if once could go to Yerushalayim and rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. That happened 70 years after Bavel became powerful. Now, that did not actually conclude the building of the Beis Hamikdash, because although people did go back to Yerushalayim and they started, they didn't complete the job. It was 18 years later that the actual permission was given, and that was what's referred to as 70 years from the Churban. Now the Gemara discusses Koresh a bit more specifically. The Gemara says, what is the meaning of the pasuk in Yeshaya? This is what Hashem says to his Mashiach, to Koresh, whose right hand I've held. The Gemara says Koresh is Mashiach. Koresh is not Mashiach. The Gemara says, no, this is how you read it. This is what Hashem said to Mashiach, to the real Mashiach, the Koresh, about Koresh, Hashem said to Mashiach that he's not happy with Koresh's activities. He told Koresh to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash himself, but Koresh didn't do that. Koresh just said all the people could go rebuild it. He wasn't personally involved, he didn't oversee it, and therefore it didn't come to its full success. Okay, now the Gemara goes back to the Megillah. So it said, Chel Paras Umadai Hapartimim. So invited to the party were the armies of Persia and Media, Chel Paras Umadai Hapartimim, the nobles. Later it says, Malchei Madai Ufaras. So here it says Paras Umadai, there it says Madai Ufaras. Why is it changed the order? And why does it associate the nobles first with Madai and later with Paras? So Gemara says the reason is because the empire was ruled by a alliance of Madai and Paras, Media and Persia, and they had made an agreement that whoever has the king, the other one will be the governors, and therefore they had this arrangement. One was a Partimim, and the other one was Hamelach. Okay, next the Megillah says Baharo. So as Osher Kavod Malchusai, he displayed the riches of his glorious kingdom. So Gemara says this teaches us that he used the Bigdei Kahuna, because it says Kifoid, it says Baharosai as Osher Kavod Malchusai, and it calls it Yakar Tiferes Gedulasai. Now, Yikar is Kavod, And kavod tiferes is what it says about the big kahuna when the pasuk describes it to be made lechavod u'lesefaris. So therefore, you see that he was using the kelim. He was using not only the kelim of Beis Hamikdash, but also the big kahuna and the clothing of the kahanim and the kohen hagadol. Okay, next it says after the first party, which was 180 days long, ended, Achashverosh made another one for the people in Shushan in his local area. So Machlokes Rav and Shmuel, if this was a smart thing to do. Versus one of them said this was a very smart thing to do. You have to first placate the people who live far from you. You have to make an alliance with them. The people who live near you, you can reach them at any time, and you can make a treaty with them at any time. Therefore, he first dealt with those that are far away. The other one says it's a very foolish thing to do. First, you have to make sure the people who are near you are on your side, because they're going to be the ones that are going to have to defend you should you be attacked. So you got to have a strong power base locally before you start working on increasing your influence further out. Okay, now the Gemara brings a conversation between Rosh Hashanah and his Talmidim. That's related to this mesiba, to the feast, the party. So the Gemara says that the Talmidim asked Shimon bar Yochai, what's the reason that Klal Yisrael was deserving of destruction in the times of Haman? So he said, you tell me. So they said, well, it must be because they enjoyed themselves at the feast of Achashverosh, Kalim of the Beis Hamikdash. There, how could they enjoy themselves? So Shimon bar Yochai says, if that was true, that would only apply for the people of Shushan. Those were the only ones that had the Kalim of the Beis Hamikdash, not everyone else. So why were they all involved in the decree? So they said, okay, Rebbe, you tell us. So he said it's because they all bowed down to the statue in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar made a statue representing himself and made everybody bow to it, and they did bow to it. So the Talmidim said, if that was true, so then how come they were saved? They did bow to it. So he said, no, they only bowed to it for show. They only went through the motions, but they didn't actually have kavanah to serve it. And therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu only did a destruction for show. He went through the motions of having a destruction be set up, but it was never actually going to be destroyed. There was no actual real decree. Okay, next, the party is described as being in the Chatzar Ginas Bisan Hamelach, the courtyard of the palace, of the house, of the garden of the king. So you have here, Chatzar is the courtyard, Ginas is the garden, Bisan is the palace. So which is it? So you have Machlokes again between Rav and Shmuel. So one says that they were divided up into three sections based on their rank. Those who were befitted to be in the Chatzar were in the Chatzar. Those who were befitting to be in the garden, which was a higher level, were in the garden. Those who were fitting to go all the way into the palace, they went into the palace itself. Now, the other approach is that he first tried to fit everybody in the Chatzar, but couldn't hold them all. So he opened up the garden, and that couldn't hold them all either, and then he opened up the actual palace itself. There's a brayso that says a similar pshat. He says that he set them in the court, and there were two openings from the court, one going into the palace, and one going into the garden, and that's where they were able to access to walk around and to enjoy themselves there. Alright, now, the party was decorated with chur, karpas, u'secheles. The Gemara says chur either refers to needlework, to woven cloths, because the word chur means holes, and weaving leaves a lot of holes. Or chor from the word chavar, meaning white, and there was sheets of white wool spread out there. Karpas is a contraction of karim pasim, cushions made out of very fine wool. And tcheles, the Gemara does not describe. Next, it speaks about glile kesef amudei sheish, silver rods and marble pillars, and the beds of gold and silver. So Gemara says, how do you understand that? Again, in Machlokes, Rabbi Yehuda says some people got beds of gold and some got beds of silver, depending on their rank. And the Tana of Nehemiah disagrees. He says it can't be, because then you would have arguments, you would have jealousy at the party itself. So instead, the surface of the beds were silver, and the legs were made out of gold. Okay, further you have Bahat Vashesh. So what's Bahat Vashesh? So Rav Asi says they were special, precious stones used to pave the floor that were hard to attain. From the word Bahat is understood as Chatat, which means to dig and to search after. They're very hard to find them. Now, that is supported by a pasuk in Zechariah, which says, Avni Nezer, Misnosisos Alad Maso, stones of a crown obtainable after many trials were over his land. and kimisnoses is from the word nisayon, to try, meaning you have to work hard to get the stones to put on the land. Next, the Megillah describes dar v'sechares. So what's dar v'sechares? So Rav says dar is from the word dore, meaning to say there were rows and rows of these precious stones that were laid around the area. And Shmuel says it means that there was a precious stone called dara, which is found in the cities that are at the shore. Now, Achashverosh put all this in the middle of the feast, and he took one precious rock, which was from there, which is very bright and it shine, and he put it in the middle, and it lit up the entire area as if it was the middle of the afternoon, even though it was in the evening. Now, the school of Rabbi Shmuel has a third shot, that dar means freedom. Achashverosh gave off of the taxes that he usually collected. Alright, next it says, drinks were served in golden cups, and the cups were diverse one from the other. Gemara says then it should say mishunim, which means that they are different. What does shonim mean? So Gemara says that there was a baskal, a voice came out and said, your predecessor Belshazzar used the kelim of the Beis Hamikdash, and you are shonim, you're repeating his mistake, and you're going to end up in the same hot water that he did. Okay, going further, the Gemara says, v'yein malchus rav, and there was a lot of royal wine. So Gemara says it should say yein harbe. That's how you say a lot of wine. What does rav mean? Rav means great. The Gemara says it means to say that each wine was older than the person who was drinking it. They made sure that you had wine that was older than you. Now, the Megillah says hashesiyah chadas. The drinking was in accordance with the law. What's the law? What is it referring to? According to the halacha, according to the law of the Torah. Just like Torah says you should eat more than you drink, here also, despite the tremendous amount of drink, there was more food than a drink. Next, the Megillah says, Ein onus, no one was forced. The Gemara says, each one drank the wine of his own country, his own town, what he was used to. There was enough wine for everyone to be accustomed to. Every type of wine that was out there was present. You did not have to drink the local Persian wine. And then it says, Lasas Kirtan Ish for Ish, according to each man's desire. So Gemara says, Ish for Ish refers to Mordechai and Haman. Each one is called Ish. It says Ish Yehudi and Haman Ish Tzar V'Oyev. They were there and they were overseeing, and Haman was in charge of what was served to most people, and Mordechai was in charge of what was served to the Jews, and they were allowed to direct how the party was run. Alright, next it says, Vashti made a feast for the women in the house of the king. So it shouldn't be in the house of the king, it should be in the Beis Hanashim, the Gemara says. This is to say that Vashti wanted to be close to the men so that they could be immoral things. She also wanted the same immorality that he did, and that the Gemara quotes an expression, he has a large squash and she has a small squash, but they both have squash. So they are aiming at the same thing. Okay, next, the Megillah says, it was on the seventh day. The king's heart was happy with the wine, meaning he was drunk. The Gemara says, what do you mean he was drunk the whole time? Why only on the seventh day? The Gemara says the seventh day refers to Shabbos, and that's where the behavior of the Jews and of the Persians became distinct. The Jews were eating and drinking, and that took them into words of Torah, the Torah, and Shiras v'Shishbachos that we do on Shabbos. But the Risham at the Suda, they began speaking of immorality. One group said that the Median women are more beautiful. One group said the Persian women are more beautiful, and that's how Achashverosh got involved. And he said, my wife is the most beautiful of all, and she is neither of them. She is a Kasti. She's Chaldean. Would you like to see her? And they said, yes, we'd like to see, if this is what you're claiming, but she has to be undressed. So Gemara says, undressed, why was that? And it was Mida Keneged Mida. She used to force Jewish women to serve her on Shabbos without any clothing on, and therefore she was ordered to appear herself on Shabbos without any clothing on as well. Alright, then it says further, the Gemara is bringing this is not the next thing, the Gemara is bringing this as a proof that Vashti received what she did herself, because it says, you remembered Vashti also what she did and what was decreed upon her. So it was Mida Keneged Mida. Alright, back to the story. It says Vatimayna Malka Vashti. Vashti refused. The Gemara says, why did she refuse? She had the same thing in mind, so why did she refuse? The Gemara says, because she broke out on Saras, and therefore she could not appear before all the men in a state of undress, and also Gavriel gave her a tail. Now, the king became greatly angry. Why so angry? The Gemara says because she didn't just say no, she sent him a rude message. She said, "You're a stable boy in the house of my father Belshazzar. My father drank as much as 1,000 people and didn't get drunk, and you just drank a little bit and you're already acting like a fool." And that made Chamasai Barabba, it made his anger burn within him. Alright, what did he do? The wise men who know the times. That refers to the Chachamim, that refers to Klal Yisrael, the Gemara says. It refers to the Talmidei Chachamim, those who know the times, meaning those who know when to make an extra leap year and how to make leap months. So Gemara says, he asked them, what should we do with this Vashti? So they said, we're stuck now. If we say to kill her, then tomorrow when he gets sober, he's going to blame us. And if we say, leave her alone, we are showing disrespect to the Malchus, because really by the law she should be killed. So what then should we do? So instead they said we cannot judge Dinei Nefashis anymore. We can't judge capital punishment trials because we're taken away from the base of Mikdash. We're thrown out of it. So we don't have a brain to think about this anymore. Go to the people of Ammon and Moab. Better off they're settled in their place like wine in a cup on the sediment. They'll be able to help you. So Gemara says that was not a narish thing that they said, that wasn't foolish. It actually reflects the pasuk in Yirmiyah that says, Shanan Moav minu Urav v'shaykidu al shmarav. Moab has been at ease from his youth and he's settled on his sediment. V'hurak mikli al keli. The golden halach has not been poured from cup to cup or sent into exile. Therefore he has his taste, he has his reason, and his sense of smell hasn't changed. He knows what he's talking about. Go ask him. Okay. Then where's Achashverosh and went and he asked Hakarav Elav, those who were close to him, and we have the list of names there, and they are explained by the Gemara as referring to the Karbanos. How so? Each name refers to some part of the Karbanos, and the Malachim were speaking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they were saying in the schos of these Karbanos, Klal Yisrael should be saved, and you should make Esther, you should get rid of that Vashti, so you should make Esther be the new queen. How do the 7 names refer to the Karbanos? So the first is Karshana, that refers to Karim B'nai Shana, the lambs of the first year old that Klal Yisrael brings as Karbanos. Sheisar refers to the Shtei Tayrim, Shtei Seirin, the 2 birds that Klal Yisrael bring as Karbanos. Admasa refers to the Mizbech, which is made of Adama, made of earth. Tarshish refers to the Big Day Kahuna, which are described as Tarshish V'Shayim V'Yashveit. Those are the stones that are on the Kohen HaGadol's Choshen. Next we have Meres. Meres means to mix. Then the Klal Yisrael has the zchus of mixing the blood of Karbanos as part of the Avoda. After that you have Marsana, which is mixing the Karban Mincha, Mirsu b'Menachos. And then finally Memuchan, a table prepared. The Klal Yisrael sets up the Shulchan for HaKadosh Baruch Hu as part of the Avoda. Alright, next the Megillah says that Memuchan spoke up. So Gemara says Memuchan. Who's Memuchan? Gemara says that he's called Memuchan because he's prepared for punishment. He's going to end up being hung, and this refers to no less than Haman. Now, Memuchan had been the youngest before. He was the last one on the list, but he spoke up. Rav Kahana says we see that a fool leaps to the front and speaks first. Okay, now, as part of his advice, messages were sent out that Lias Kol Ish Sor B'Veisel, everyone should rule in his own house. So Gemara says this was also part of the saving of Klal Yisrael, because when people saw that, they said, this is stupid. What kind of foolish king sends out such a rule, which everybody's already doing? Even a lowly weaver is the authority in his own house, and therefore they did not want to listen to the next decree that came out, which was to kill the Jews, because they would have killed him right away had it been the first decree, and not waited for the day that they were told, which was Yud Gimel Adar. Alright, now, Achashverosh then went to search for a king. So what did he do? So he did Vayafken HaMelech V'Kidim. He sent officers to gather the women. Now, David HaMelech did something similar. He also went to search for a young girl to serve him when he was cold in the end of his life. That was Avisha Gashunamis. But they did it differently. Achashverosh, it says Vayafken HaMelech V'Kidim. He sent officers because the girls did not want to go, because they knew that they were going to be violated by the king and they did not want that. David HaMelech was not going to do that, and therefore they said, search for a good young girl, and everybody wanted their daughter, and the girls all wanted to get the job. Based on this, the Gemara describes it as Kol Aram Yasa B'das, a wise man to do things wisely, Uchsil Yifra Shiveles, but a fool spreads out his foolishness. Okay, going further, the Gemara says there was Mordechai Ish Yehudi Hay B'Shushan Abira Ushmai Mordechai ben Yair ben Shimi ben Kish Ishimini. His name was Mordechai, son of Yair, son of Shimi, son of Kish, from Binyamin. The Gemara says, well, if you want to list names, go all the way back to Binyamin. Why do you list this 3 and no more? The Gemara says, because these are 3 descriptive terms for Mordechai himself. Yair, meaning to bring light, that he brightened Klal Yisrael through his tefillos. Shimi, that his prayers, his tefillos were heard, Shama by Kadosh Baruch Hu. And Kish, that he knocked on the door, on Shari Rachamim, and they were open wide for him. Now the Gemara says there's a contradiction. You call him Yehudi and you call him Yemini. Which is he? From Yehuda or from Binyamin? So the Gemara gives a couple of answers here. So the Gemara says that he was claimed by Yehuda and by Binyamin. Binyamin took credit for him because he was descended from Binyamin. Yehuda took credit for him because David HaMelech from Shevet Binyamin didn't kill Shimi ben Gera out of his own mercy, and therefore Mordechai was able to be born. Mordechai was descended from Shimi ben Gera, born later. Now, Rava says when Klal Yisrael were upset with Mordechai for causing the decree against them, apparently, by his refusing to bow, they each blamed the other for it. Binyamin, they said, look what Yehuda did to me, and look what Binyamin did to me. Look what Yehuda did to me because he didn't kill Shimi. David HaMelech didn't kill Shimi, and now we're stuck with Mordechai. Look what Binyamin did to me refers to Shaul, who was supposed to destroy Amalek and Agag, but he failed to destroy Amalek. Now the Gemara gives one final resolution. Gemara says he's called a Yehudi. He was from Shevet Binyamin. He was called a Yehudi because he got rid of Avodah Zarah. Anybody who rejects Avodah Zarah is called Yehudi. Like it says, Aisi Guvin Yehudayin, that Hanani, Mishael, and Azariah refused to serve to Nebuchadnezzar's Avodah Zarah, and they were called Yehudayin for that.